Hi, I'm Nick Palmisciano, and this is the Bad News Network. The border and its associated policy remains a total clown car. The argument of the week regards the fact that Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez referred to the camps on the border as concentration camps. The right and Yad Vashem jumped all over her, saying it is not appropriate for her to call ICE detention centers concentration camps, as they're not remotely comparable to Nazi concentration camps. The left, for their part, suddenly became vast experts on concentration camps, and definitions flew all over the internet showing that these are in fact concentration camps because they don't have judicial review, and that what the right is really talking about is extermination camps as opposed to concentration camps.
I'm glad we got that straight.
Let's be real for a second. We have a bunch of people living in inhumane conditions on the border, including children, and that's just un-American. So let's fix it. And to be clear, I'm pro-immigration, but very much anti-illegal immigration. I am not for open borders. But we have to treat people well, even if we opt to decide not to give them asylum status. Most decent people should be able to agree on that, even if we completely disagree on immigration policy. So that's what our politicians are working through right now, right? You know the answer. Of course not. Republicans have repeatedly asked for more funding, ostensibly to improve border conditions, but also to build part of Trump's wall, which you absolutely know the Democrats are not going to sign up for under any condition. The Democrats have offered funding as long as some riders are included that essentially make it illegal for the Department of Homeland Security to prosecute illegal immigrants who opt to house the children coming in illegally while this judicial process is going on, essentially circumventing the system and creating a backdoor to allow illegal immigration to become legal. So you know the Republicans are not signing up for that. Essentially, both sides are now gaming the system to prep for the presidential elections. The Democrats believe that their base is going to stay more activated for the presidential elections if the conditions down there are dire and they can just be these constant heroes fighting that fight. Republicans don't want this problem solved because they're running on fixing the border crisis, not on a fixed border crisis, because then there's no bad guy. Never surrender! Never solution! Meanwhile, kids are suffering and we look cruel and unjust, because frankly, we're being cruel and unjust. And for those of you that are saying, well, the parents did this to the kids, they should have never made that trip with small children, so what? If I see an American parent abusing an American kid, I'm going to step in. I'm not going to blame the kid for it. There really isn't a difference here. While people are in our custody, they need to be treated well. Border Patrol is overworked and they have limited resources. So they need support. Regardless of what you want to happen with immigration, we need to immediately solve the problem of conditions and then leave the politicians to solve the problem of policy. That is the American thing to do.
Venezuela has sold about 7.5 tons of gold from its bank's vault in order to circumvent U.S. sanctions. In January, however, the United States asked that foreign buyers of gold stop doing business with the Venezuelan government. This prompted a 29-ton UAE gold sale to be completely scrapped. However, some deals continued against the wills of their governments. In March, Ugandan authorities said they were investigating their largest gold refinery, AGR. This after the state media reported that 7.4 tons of gold, estimated at $300 million, could have originated from Venezuela. You gotta be kidding me. A gunman opened fire outside of a federal building and a courthouse in Dallas this week. The gunman was armed with a rifle and about 8 magazines. He had on a ski mask, some spectacles, a vest, and a belt with mag pouches.
Jesus Christ, that's Jason Bourne.
According to reports, the gunman ran up to the side of the building and started opening fire on a couple of windows. He broke 2 of them. As the guards inside returned fire, the gunman was quoted as saying, "Oh Jesus, this is terrible. This is not what I thought it would be at all. Call of Duty lied to me. I've got to get out of here. My mother's gonna be so mad. Oh, my sweater's gonna have so many holes in it." Shortly after, he was gunned down in the parking lot across the street.
Did that go the way you thought it was gonna go? Nope.
The murder case underway for Navy SEAL Edward Gallagher took a dramatic turn on Thursday. right out of the pages of The Practice or Boston Legal. First Class Petty Officer Corey Scott was not willing to testify until he received immunity. Once he received that immunity, he took the stand. And what did he say? He said that Gallagher isn't the one that actually killed this ISIS terrorist. He did. This literally happened in both The Practice and Boston Legal. I was going to say that you can't write this stuff, but they can, they have, and it was copied. Scott testified that he held his thumb over the windpipe of the wounded ISIS fighter because he felt like that would be more humane than turning him over to Iraqi authorities. The prosecution immediately jumped on Scott, accusing him of changing his testimony only after receiving immunity, and what we can only imagine sounded like this. Scott quickly replied, "You played yourself!" While this is not case closed for Gallagher, it significantly damages the prosecution's case. We'll continue to follow this as it unfolds.
This week, the Pakistani politician Mitch Johnson hosted a live stream for his party while briefing journalists. Everything was routine until someone on his social media team activated the cat button, making everyone's faces into cats, and the internet won again. For a short amount of time, the entire meeting was conducted by cute, adorable cat faces. Later, Mitch Johnson said that they had taken the video down and that measures had been taken to make sure that it never happens again. Which totally means that they killed the guy. Seriously, that guy is totally dead. The video may be down, but screenshots of the kitten-faced meeting are everywhere, so if they think that's the last that they've seen of it, they gotta be kidding themselves. It's a real catastrophe per Pakistan. They're feline the burn of embarrassment right now.
In international news, an investigative panel has declared with certainty that China is using its re-education camps to harvest the organs of prisoners. An independent tribunal in China cites numerous human rights violations that border on genocide. Throughout the world, transplant wait times are significantly lengthy, often for years, but yet in China, for some reason, it's only about 3 days. As investigators searched for answers, it became abundantly clear that China has been harvesting organs from people against their will. Once the organs were harvested, the bodies were then dumped. Testimony from one Chinese surgeon said that he'd even harvested organs from people that were still alive. This tribunal is an independent investigation and doesn't have any connection to legal proceedings. However, everyone involved hopes that a body like the UN takes action at these appalling human rights violations. Iran's Revolutionary Guard announced Thursday that it shot down a Global Hawk surveillance drone near the Gulf of Oman to send a clear message to America about violating its airspace. U.S. Central Command said that the Iranians used a surface-to-air missile to shoot down the aircraft. However, the United States claims that the drone was operating in international airspace when it was shot down by the Iranians. The downing of the drone has definitely escalated tensions between the United States and Iran, and war hawks everywhere are saying things like, "Iran will feel our sting." I realize that when you're old enough to not have to go to war, and that when you have the greatest military the world has ever seen at your disposal, it's easy to jump to tough guy-isms. But you know what? This isn't your favorite sports team. You're not sending the Patriots to play the Falcons, and maybe they fell behind 28-3 and then staged the greatest comeback in Super Bowl history. You're sending young men and women, barely adults, to go fight and die in a war over the slightest provocation that doesn't even involve the loss of human life. So yes, it bothers me that we have congressmen and senators talking about going to war with Iran like our military is some kind of personal muscle for them. It's like having a guy in a bar bump into you, and instead of pushing him back or getting into a fight yourself, turning around and having 3 giant paid bodyguards just kick the ever-loving crap out of him. You feel empowered, but you have no skin in the game. And I'm worried that the American public no longer goes hard on politicians for stances like this because we no longer feel the squeeze. In the old days, if we wanted to go to war, not only did Congress have to vote on it, there was a chance some of us might be drafted into it, and no matter what, we had to pay for it with things like war bonds and taxes. We've not only been going to war for decades with a smaller percentage of the population than has ever taken place, so that fewer and fewer families are actually feeling the pinch of having somebody serve, but we're doing it without paying for it, lowering taxes while going to war, so we're racking up trillions and trillions of dollars of war debt. And we have these clowns talking about throwing down in another war while we still have troops throwing down in Iraq and Afghanistan and Africa, and we even still have troops in places like the Balkans, a place that I was sitting in 99, 2000. And then these people that serve come back and they are literally committing suicide in VA parking lots because we don't put any effort behind taking care of them when they get back. And we're ready to do this all over again in a place that's going to be much bloodier than Iraq over a drone? George Washington did not want a second term as president. He was exhausted. He yearned for home. He just wanted all of it to end because he had been fighting for years, and then he was president and he had to deal with politics and the infighting between Jefferson and Hamilton, and it was just time for him to rest. But he did it anyway. And he did it because Britain and France were engaging in a war, and Jefferson was pushing hard to support France because they had supported us during the American Revolution, and Hamilton was pushing hard to support the English because the British accounted for about 80 to 85% of all of our tax revenue. So these guys are arguing about ideology, but Washington knew what others didn't, that war should always be the last option. America narrowly won the Revolutionary War by the slightest of margins. Being involved in another protracted campaign, even if we won, could mean the end of the Union, but certainly significant financial failures on the part of the American system. Washington knew this because he didn't see things the way he wanted them to be, the way that Hamilton and Jefferson did. He saw them the way that they were. And the same is true now. Our power and our military capacity is not infinite. Furthermore, as the big dog, we actually can afford to have a lot more patience. Time is on our side. We can put pressure in so many different ways to see how this plays out in the long term without rushing to a violent end. It may very well be that we end up in a war with Iran. I'm not sitting here defending their government. Their policies are downright evil, and they absolutely have caused loss of American life in Iraq and Afghanistan. But the war should not start over this. Thankfully, and to his credit, President Trump feels the same way. After initially signing off on a plan to retaliate against Iran, the president canceled 3 airstrikes with hours to go. He asked the general in charge of the mission what the expected loss of life was, and the general replied, about 150 people. The president announced that he did not feel this was a proportionate response to a downed drone, and instead opened the door for negotiations with Iran. Despite his bluster on a great many things, he has consistently shown that he values life and does not rush into war. I hope that that continues. There may be a place for war with Iran, but it should be the absolute last choice that we make.
In South Philadelphia this week, federal authorities found 16.5 tons of cocaine on a cargo ship. 16.5 tons. That's 33,000 pounds of cocaine valued at $1 billion, and they're still going through the ship because they don't think they've found it all yet. So far, 2 men with 80s movie Russian villain names have been arrested, with one of them saying that he was offered $50K to move the drugs from Peru. Anyone else think that's a slight underpayment? Hey Jimmy, can you safely bring this briefcase full of money to the bank? It's about $1 million. I'll give you a quarter. But it looks like people are finding drugs all over the place, as 186 pounds of meth were found in 2 suitcases in Washington Forest. Okanagan County Sheriff's Office helped HSI in a smuggling investigation in the forest outside of Mazama. Sergeant Gene Davis and his K-9 partner Gunner discovered the suitcases in the forest. Authorities say the street value of the drugs is estimated to be around $1 million. They have no idea who left the drugs in the forest. The acreage is about 4.1 million acres, but that's a long way to go before it hits the streets. If you do plan to go out to the forest, it's probably best to go build a fort, play paintball, or even look for Sasquatch. Just don't mess around.
And finally, in Florida news, a man has been convicted of stealing and sexually gratifying himself with 35 pool floats in an effort to not rape women. 35-year-old Christopher Monin has been accused of stealing over 13 pool floats in the last few months. However, when his residence was searched, they found over 75 more. He's being charged with burglary and criminal mischief. And the worst part? The inflatable shark is pregnant. She's decided to keep it. And with that, I'm Nick Palmisano, and this is the Bad News Network. Our news is at least as bad as the news you're getting already, and if you're thinking about traveling to China as an American and you're worried about it, don't worry. Our hearts are covered in fat, and our livers are destroyed by alcohol. They don't want them anyway.